Welcome to the new year. And, last year I had a hard time writing 2023, but it's amazing how quickly as I've been doing things. I mean, just no problem, 24 for some reason. So I'm thinking, that's a good sign. It's going to be a good year. Have a seat. Have a seat. Glad you guys are here today. I thought, what do we do starting out 24? I thought, what if I could just give you guys some wisdom? It's interesting, Solomon could have prayed for anything. But what does he pray for? Yeah, wisdom. Wisdom for life, wisdom for relationship. The wisdom is the thing he prayed for, So I thought, listen, I'm going to give you guys some wisdom for 2024. How many of you could use a little wisdom? Now, wives, don't be hitting your husbands like that with the elbow. So I thought, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. Here's going to be our wisdom thought for 2024. You ready for this? What's the one thing I can learn from a dog? Yeah. Did you know you can learn something from a dog? Today we're going to talk about that. That's my message title. The one thing humans can learn from a dog. And so I want to talk to you about, I want to give you a critical key to help you in 2024. There's lots of things. People pay a lot of money for seminars and read tons of books to try to navigate life more strategically and more effectively. But I want to give you a simple key and rehearse this, and it's something you've got to cultivate in your life, a critical key to navigate your life with success. What single attitude do you think can help you soar above everything else? I like that. I like joy. We could do a message on that, maybe we will. Thank you, Debbie. There's some of you, my kids, we used to read, when they were growing up, we'd read the John Maxwell books on success for life. And one of the things Maxwell always said, I'm not sure where he got it, but he said, attitude determines your altitude. Say this after me. Attitude determines your altitude. Like, how high do you want to fly? Well, your attitude will determine that. Your attitude, and so the question today is, what attitude can help you move forward with success? What attitude can help you move forward, even in joy, when things are tough? When you hit a wall? When there's challenges? Because guess what? One thing's for certain. When you woke up this morning, you woke up with one. Look at the person next to you and say, you have an attitude. Oh, come on, like you mean it. You have an attitude. And the truth is you do. You have an attitude about life. You have an attitude about relationships. You have an attitude about your job. And if you spend any time on social media, which I know none of you do, one of the things you'll notice is on social media is there's a lot of attitudes. Tons of attitudes. A lot of arrogance, a lot of pride, a lot of superiority, sadly a lot of judgmentalism on social media. But today I want to talk about an attitude you don't see very much on social media. It's an attitude, in fact, you don't see talked too much about on the news. It's the attitude of gratefulness. Or if you want to make it a rhyme, say this after me. Attitude of gratitude. Yeah, gratefulness. The attitude of gratefulness. And really, part of the attitude of gratefulness, I think, is having an attitude of humility. I think they're kind of partnered together because when I'm grateful, and I'm in an attitude of great gratefulness, and when I'm gracious, then that causes me to be humble towards other people. Don't you think that's a good thing? Humility? See, when I have an attitude of gratitude, I've got a heart that's postured in a way that God can flow through me. How many of you want the love of God to flow through your heart? Well, listen, let me tell you the channel that opens that up. It's gratefulness. Gratitude. Gratitude creates flow for God through you. And listen, it makes a world of difference whether you live this life with gratefulness or whether you live with a sense of entitlement or judgmentalism. Now, many of you know I'm a dog person. I've always loved our dogs, and it's amazing to me how much a dog can exemplify the attitude of gratefulness way better than people do. Way better than humans do. And so to start off this morning, I want to share with you the difference between a dog's attitude and a cat's attitude. And to do this, I want to compare, I actually have this. This is for real. These are the journal entries for one day in the life of a dog, and I want to compare those with the journal entries that a cat made in the life of a cat, which is probably everything you need to know about the dog right here. Here's what the dog wrote in the dog's journal. 8 a.m., dog food, my favorite thing. 9:30, a car ride, my favorite thing. 9:40, walk in the park, my favorite thing. Got rubbed and petted. 12 o'clock, lunch. 3 o'clock, wagged my tail, my favorite thing. 5 o'clock, milk bones. Oh, come on, with more enthusiasm. 8 o'clock, wow, watch TV with the people. 11 o'clock, sleeping on the bed. Okay, you see, that's a dog's heart. And I love that. Grateful in all things. The Apostle Paul said something about being grateful in all things. And people aren't so good at it, but dogs are great at it. Okay, now for the excerpt from a cat's diary. Day 983 of my captivity. My captors continue to taunt me with bizarre little dangling objects. Today I was almost successful in an attempt to assassinate one of my tormentors by weaving around his feet as he was walking. I'll try again tomorrow, but at the top of the stairs instead. You can live life with gratefulness and humility where you recognize everything's a gift. Say this after me. Everything is a gift. Yeah. My favorite thing. My favorite thing. Or you can live with an attitude of ungratefulness or entitlement or superiority or judgmentalism. John chapter 7, verse 38. I said gratitude creates the flow of life through your heart. It'll free you to liberate you from unforgiveness. Wow. Bitterness. Look at John 7. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture said, rivers of living water will flow from within. Rivers, that speaks of refreshing life. It's something you can't contain. A river is something you can't contain. It's something that flows and gets on everybody else too. That gratitude spills over from your life and touches and impacts other people who are broken and hurting and empty. And so I want to suggest today that if you want rivers to flow through your heart in 2024, if you want this year to be a year where God's joy and love, you mentioned joy, flow through you, then you choose to have an attitude of gratefulness and humility. And when you have an attitude of gratefulness, you know what? You're receptive to other people. The one thing humans can learn from a dog is gratitude. Say gratitude. Yeah, so gratitude keeps the living waters flowing in your heart. But guess what? There are also attitudes that stop the flow, that stop things up. If you want to stop the flow, well, have an attitude of superiority. Have an attitude of self-righteousness. You know it all spiritually. Have an attitude of ungratefulness. Have an attitude of entitlement. The thing about entitlement, too, is it can be spiritual entitlement. Not just a physical, emotional thing. It can be kind of a spiritual thing. In a classic story that Jesus tells, he points that very thing out to his listeners. It's a story that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 18. It's very interesting that in setting up the story, Luke actually tells us who it is that Jesus is talking to. He gives us two characteristics about the listeners. And we zip through this story sometimes, and we often miss this. So here's who Jesus is speaking to. In verse 9 of Luke 18, I don't think I gave you that verse, but I'll tell you, it says this. It says, Jesus was speaking to some people who were confident in their own righteousness. So, yeah, did someone say, uh-oh? Yeah, uh-oh. So they were certain about their standing before God. They were certain about how their standing before God was measured. So there were some that were confident and some who looked down on everyone else. Glad that doesn't happen anymore. So he tells this parable in Luke chapter 18, verses 10 through 14. Here we go. It's a story you're familiar with. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself, praying, God, I thank you because I'm not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector right here. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. But the tax collector standing far off, so interesting, he's standing far off as well, would not even lift his eyes to heaven. He beat upon his chest saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. Wow. Or uh-oh. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. Have you ever noticed how Jesus kind of turns a story on his head, turns things on their head? You know, who's in is actually out. And who's out on the outside, they're doing fine. They're on the inside. See, for you and I to really get the power of the story, it's critical that you notice, as I mentioned, the people who Jesus is talking to in the audience. He tells us 2 traits. Number 1, some who are confident in their righteousness. And number 2, who look down upon everybody else. So the story that's being told by Jesus is to people who thought they were righteous. So basically, they had a strong confidence in their ability to love God and love people, but they were failing at it. They were the least loving of all. And so with this story, Jesus is trying to rattle his listeners. And here's why. Because superiority and self-righteousness are hard to recognize in the person that struggles with it. The person that has a problem with superiority and self-righteousness and judgmentalism often does not see it. We've got a hard time recognizing it in ourselves. I mean, we know when we're angry. That's apparent. We know when we're resentful. I mean, people go to pastors every day. People go to therapists every day. Pastor, I'm struggling with anger. Can you pray for me and help me? Or I'm struggling with resentment. And this anger, I know this anger is damaging my relationships and damaging my heart. We all know that. And people buy books, go to classes, all that stuff, and listen to talks to help with these problems. I've never known a pastor or a therapist who had a single person schedule an appointment with them and say, you know what, I need help with my self-righteousness. Pastor, I need help with my judgmentalism. Could you pray for me? No, one of the biggest problems with superiority and pride is the people who suffer from it don't know it. Now, the irony with this story is that a lot of Christians who hear this story about the humble tax collector and the self-righteous, prideful Pharisee, you know what they often say? Oh, thank God I'm not like the Pharisee. Thank God I'm not like that Pharisee. Yeah, the Pharisee who said, thank God I'm not like the tax collector. So if we're going to have ears to hear the story, we can't start with a judgmental attitude, right? We can't start with the attitude that assumes about the Pharisee what he assumes about the tax collector. You know, in our day, modern culture, the Pharisee kind of has a bad connotation to it. Negative. That was not the case in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, Pharisees were looked up to. They were thought of as good. On the other hand, you know who was looked down upon? The tax collector. You know who was despised? The tax collector. They were traitors. They betrayed us. They were taking our money and giving it to the occupying superpower, Rome. So in this story, the Pharisee and the tax collector both go up to the temple to pray. And it was at the time of the daily sacrifice, so there would have been a lot of people there. And the priest, during the sacrifice, he would kill the sacrifice, and he would go inside the holy place. You had the outer court, the holy place, and the most holy place. Only went once a year into the most holy place, Day of Atonement. But here, he goes into the center court to burn the incense and to burn the sacrifice. And so at this point, the crowds would typically pray when the priest went in there. It was actually common in Jewish culture to pray out loud. Jesus says the Pharisee stood up and prayed. And then it can be translated, he prayed about himself, to himself. Probably the best translation right here is he stood up and he prayed by himself. So in other words, the Pharisee kind of moves away. He goes over by himself to separate himself from the filthy masses. He didn't want to be touched by anyone in the crowd because that would make him unclean. We can't have that because he's righteous. So the Pharisee's not happy that there are sinners hanging around the house of God. They might contaminate it. So he does an interesting thing with his prayer since there are people nearby. You ever heard someone pray out loud, but you can tell they're not really praying, but they're sending a message to someone else in the little prayer circle maybe? Someone else listening? So the Pharisee's not really praying at all. He thinks he's praying, but he's actually saying these words publicly so they can be heard by as many people as possible. How come you can't be more like me, you lousy tax collector? So kind of deliberately humiliating the tax collector. And then in addition, he compares himself. He's comparing himself to others, which makes him feel superior. Thank you, God. He says this, thank you, God, I'm not like all other men, especially this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all I get. Now, what's so cool is Jesus has loaded these lines with tons of things that the listeners would have gotten. According to the Torah, according to Leviticus in the 25th chapter, an Israelite was required by law to fast one time a year at the Day of Atonement. Do you notice how often this guy fasts? Twice a week. Yeah, twice a week. That's like 100 times more than the law required. Then it says, I give 1/10 of all I get. Now there's a reason why he says, I give 1/10 of all I get. According to the Old Testament law, tithing would have already been observed on the wine, the grain, the oil, by those who produced it, so the farmers. So it wasn't necessary when you received grain or oil or wine, for example, to tithe on them again because it had already been tithed on. But he goes ahead and does that anyway. See, this guy assumes the measure of his spiritual greatness, or the measure of his status in the eyes of God, can be done by all this religious activity. He assumes his status in the eyes of God by all the religious activity he's doing instead of by the person he's becoming. Yeah, he's a human doing instead of a human being. Did you know you're a human being, not a human doing? So he uses the low spiritual reputation of the tax collector to make him feel better about himself. You see what's happening here, don't you? Religion and performance have just become a way for him to lift himself up, and he doesn't even know it. And it's so crazy because this guy's need for superiority and reputation, and really anybody who has that need for superiority and reputation, it's so obnoxious when we see it. But the person himself doesn't even see it. The problem is we have a hard time seeing it in ourselves. I remember years ago going to lunch with a pretty well-known pastor, not in town, but out of town. I had a chance to go have lunch with a guy. A prominent, you know who it was if I told you. And so for about an hour and a half, I sat and listened to him drop names about all the people that he knew. And all the important people he knows. And how impressed they were with him. And all the impressive things he'd done. You ever just hear someone they name drop for like an hour? What was so amazing, he wasn't, I don't think, really even aware that he was doing it. And I thought about that afterwards. I thought, is he that clueless? Can anybody be so blind? And then I had this terrible thought. What if I do that? Could I be so blind that I miss myself doing that? So I asked someone close to me, I was like, do I do that? And they said, well, it'd be worth asking a few folks. And so I did. So the next week when I was having lunch with Chip and Joe, no, I just made that up. But here's the irony, guys. Here's the irony. If you ask a Pharisee, how's your spiritual life going these days? What would he say? Well, it's going great. I was worshiping. I was praying. My fasting is better than ever. I'm tithing. I'm giving more than I ever did before. I'm going to temple. My spiritual life is great. But actually, he's violating love and doesn't even have a clue. Because you can pursue impressing people, or you can pursue loving people, but you can't do both.
Yeah.
Well, at least I'm not like that Pharisee. Really? You ever find yourself even quietly passing judgment on somebody? Or don't raise your hand. Ever get a little twinge of joy being critical? You ever find out somebody messed up really bad and you actually kind of feel slightly good about it? A little better about yourself? Maybe a little superior? Or you're critical of somebody that has a personality that's hard for you, or critical of someone that wears clothes you don't care for, or likes music you don't like, or somebody's politics are different than mine, someone's theology is messed up, someone's going a little further in life than you are in life. And so I step back and close my heart off, little by little, from that person and that relationship. Yeah, 2 men went up to the temple to be with God. One of them was a Pharisee, and the higher he climbed, the further away from God he got. Then there's the tax collector, and this is the unsettling and even shocking part about the story, is rabbis did not tell stories where the tax collector was the hero. So that would have been very unsettling for people listening to Jesus tell this story, because he's flipping things on their head. Tax collectors had sold out their people to Rome. They were corrupt. They were greedy. They were traitors. But in this story, a tax collector goes to the temple, and all these people are there, a big crowd. And so Jesus says the tax collector stood at a distance. Kind of interesting. Did you catch the fact that both the Pharisee and the tax collector stood at a distance? They both separated themselves. But they separated themselves for 2 different reasons. The Pharisee separated himself. He did it because he was above everybody. He was superior. He was righteous. He was clean. The tax collector did it because he knew how broken he was. He was just grateful to be there. I hope you're just grateful to be in the family of God, to be under the grace of God. Look at verse 13, talking about the tax collector. He wouldn't even look to heaven. Couldn't do it. He can't bring himself to look to God, to look into the eyes of God. So, and then it says he does something really extraordinary. Jesus said he beat his chest. So he stands apart, won't look to heaven, and he beats his chest. Now, the act of beating your chest was considered to be an expression of extreme agony in that culture. Very rare. When it was done, it was almost always done by women. It's only mentioned twice in the Bible. Never in the Old Testament, but mentioned twice in the New Testament. Right here and one other place where Jesus is crucified at Golgotha. So he stood apart, wouldn't look to heaven, beats his chest, and prays, God have mercy on me, a sinner. God have mercy. I don't deserve it. See, say this after me. God's mercy. You can come on, JB. God's mercy found me. Yes. Say it again. God's mercy found me. Yeah, the Pharisee made it really clear what he thought. Did you notice the Pharisee makes it super clear about what he thinks about the tax collector's condition? Yeah, he makes it real clear what he thinks about other people and the tax collector. The Pharisee does. He makes it super clear. Oh, here's what I think about him. But what does the tax collector think about the Pharisee? Guess what? He's not. He's not thinking about the Pharisee. He's thinking, Lord, I messed up. God, I don't deserve your mercy. I'm not entitled. And so he sees a sacrifice right there at the altar, a lamb sacrifice. He smells the incense. And his prayer is, God, is it possible that your grace could include me? Is it possible that there's enough mercy for me? Is there a chance your mercy could find me? And there was. There was enough grace to include him, and Jesus knew that. So here's my conclusion. One thing can stop the flow of that river in your heart. One thing can stop the flow of mercy and grace, and it's pride and ungratefulness. But one thing can keep the water flowing. This is good. One thing can keep the water flowing. You know what it is? Say it. Gratitude. Gratefulness. And the death that Jesus would die on the cross was the sacrifice that opened up grace for you and for me. It opened up mercy for you. See, life begins when you pray like the tax collector prayed. God, I'm not entitled. God, I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful for every moment. I'm grateful. I see every moment as a gift. The ups, the downs, the hard times, the joyful times, the mountaintop, the valley. It's all a gift. The journey's a gift. And you're with me in the whole journey. Gratitude has to be cultivated. Say this after me. Gratitude has to be cultivated. Yeah, it has to be. You've got to put it in practice. Partly because we live in such a culture of entitlement. And so as we start 2024, I want to cultivate and water those seeds and cultivate an attitude of gratitude. I've got to remind myself what an amazing gift life is. Even when there's pain, yes, even when there's struggle, I'm grateful. So instead of being entitled and judgmental, I want to cultivate one attitude this week. Let's just try this week. Or just try today, and then try again tomorrow. One attitude. It's the attitude of being grateful. Attitude of gratitude. Which means what? I become grateful for every moment. That's hard to do. It's hard for us to live in the moment. We're so busy thinking about what we're going to do that, well, I just missed the moment. That's gone now. You know, that's what life is. It's moments. All added up. You get a life. So I want to be grateful every moment and receive it as a gift. So I'm going to give you one word for this week to help you, okay? You ready? It's going to help you. Here's the word. Great. I want you to shout that out as loud as you can. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Great.
Yeah, and that is short for grateful. So your word for this week is great. Say it again.
Great.
That's it. One word. How easy is that? Paul said, be grateful in all things. So this week, when someone pulls in front of you, you're going to shout, great! 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 I can learn grace. Great! I can learn grace. When one of your kids does something to test your nerves, great! I'm going to grow in patience this week. When things don't go so well at work, or you didn't get the promotion they said that you'd get the first of the year, or whatever, great! I get to grow in perseverance. Work harder. Keep building my resume. Live with excellence. So I don't care what other people think. It's like the story of Michelangelo. I've told you, he was painting the Sistine Chapel. And he spent weeks painting one corner of the Sistine Chapel and nobody could see. He was tucked away, and one day the priest was walking by and said, Michelangelo, what are you doing up there? Nobody can see what you're painting. No one will ever see what you're painting. And from high atop the Sistine Chapel, his voice whispering down, God will. God will see my excellence, my work, my perseverance. Great! Finances are tight. You're going to say what? Great! I'm grateful that I can learn to be more resourceful with what I have. So your word this week, your response this week is going to be a resounding shout of the word, great! Because it's gratefulness that will allow you to cultivate a flow of love and grace and humility. And guess what? You can't contain that flow. You can't contain that love and that grace, that forgiveness. It'll be contagious. It'll spill over at work, at school, wherever you are, over your family. Say gratefulness.
Gratefulness.
The one thing we can learn from a dog. The one thing humans could learn from a dog. Yeah, it's like, I got to wake up. God was right here. My favorite thing. God provided a meal, some food, some sustenance for me and my family. My favorite thing. I got to love the people around me. My favorite thing. Wow. What a gift. Father, thank you for the grace. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you that your mercy found me. Stand to your feet. And say this. Stand to your feet. Stand to your feet. And say this after me. God, thank you that your mercy found me.